love of this country, of this nation, its values that kept us heartened. And when those men and women returned from serving overseas, 20 Medal of Honors were awarded to Japanese American community. This is a nation of multi-racial democracy. If you want to see the proof of it, go to section 60 of Arlington Cemetery. I have extended that invitation to this president. Go to section 60, face the tombstones, and you will see all races, all faiths defending this country. That is true America. And that is where the majority stands. One more example. Throughout my travel, I was in Chicago. David Axelrod took me to a museum where I saw posters. Those sit in the museum now. Irish need not apply. The only jobs Irish immigrants could find was janitorial jobs because no one would hire them. But within 30 years, that is where the example of courage and organization lies. Within 30 years, they elected the first Irish American president of the United States, John F. Kennedy. It is that fact. I consider it. I have seen throughout my travels to your districts, to many states, many places, how encouraged, how enthusiastic this nation is to get rid of this unconstitutional, illegal rhetoric, un-American practice. Last election, 2018 election, you saw record number of people showed up to vote. And look at the result. Look at the result. This is what is going to happen in 2019. We are going to elect, I come from Charlottesville, Virginia. We are going to elect, we laid only one vote in Virginia Assembly. We are going to elect Virginia Assembly majority. We are going to elect in 2020. We are going to repeat 2018. We are going to elect majority in our Senate and throw the demagogue out of the White House. But it will require all of us to contribute to each and every campaign. I know among us, I have met several of the local candidates. You are the hope. You are the organizers at the grassroots level. That is how we are going to build, and that is how we are going to win. And organize, remain heartened. I have noticed one more. I know my answer is getting longer, but I wish to share this. Wherever there had been a candidate from the Muslim community, I have felt the spirit of that community at a much higher level than other communities. Become candidates. Run for office. Run for local office. Run for state offices. That is how we are going to. This fight is not only one election fight. Prepare yourself. Prepare your children for this fight to continue. Look, those who chanted at the North Carolina rally, that illegal, unconstitutional rally, they have forsaken the maxims of enlightenment, equality, and inclusiveness. They have forsaken not only in the United States, but in other parts of Europe as well. So this election, next election, and election after that is going to be, are we for multiracial democracy or democracy only for some? Remain standing, remain encouraged, deal with this phobia. It only, as I said to my honorable member of Congress, Ilhan, that this headwind that is blowing, it is blowing to lift you higher. And that is the role of the Muslim community throughout the nation. The world and this nation looks up to you to lead. You have been chosen. Your time has chosen you. You have a choice whether to face this headwind and fly higher or be defeated. You make the choice for the sake of yourself, for the sake of your children. Make sure that you remain a beacon of hope for the rest of the country. The candle bearers in the darkest of night do not walk behind, do not walk on sidelines, they walk front and center. Make the decision today, make the decision in your quiet moment. I am going to be the candle bearer for my community, for this nation. And you will see, you have made the difference in 2018, you will make the difference in 2019, you will make the difference in 2020. May God be with you. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Khan. Last but certainly not least, Delegate Rasool.
Thank you so much. I get to follow that, huh? Well, I appreciate, first of all, your powerful speech. Thank you for all that you've done and for your sacrifice to our country, for sure. Ken touched on values. Abdul talked about distraction, and then Ilhan, of course, strategically was saying we need to be smart about how we approach all of this. And it's been great. Before you came in, Councilman Jones made this proclamation that all of us men, all of us Muslim men, and adopted Muslim men up here on the stage, we stand with you Muslim women who are standing very strong and really representing a bold voice and moving forward. So I want to make sure we get that shout out to Councilman Jones. Look, it really is distraction. Right after the Civil War, 1865, there was a period of Reconstruction. And in Virginia, dozens of African Americans were elected to the General Assembly. And what happened was there was this period, about 20 years, where many people of color served. And then someone came up with a strategy for distraction. It was, hey, now poor whites and poor blacks are the same. But if we come up with this new strategy of these Jim Crow laws, we can give this status, this distraction, so we can implement these policies that enrich a few folks. And that enrichment, as we know, continued on until 1929 when the stock market crashed. And it was all an economic distraction to pit white versus black. Go back and research how many people of color actually served in the General Assembly of Virginia and how rich our heritage was. And now we fast forward. And I'm so glad that you talked about focusing on values and thinking about being strategic. Because many times, I'll just be honest with you, when the Muslim ban came up, I don't want people to defend Muslims. I want people to defend the Constitution, as you talked about. Our collective values. This is not America. And in the Virginia House of Delegates, there is one document on the wall. Guess what that is? The Statute for Religious Freedom. And it sits right behind my Republican friends, and it sits there, and it's a reminder that religious freedom in the Western world began in the House of Delegates here in Virginia. And so we need to make sure we recognize these distractions, push back against them, the bigger battles within ourselves to be able to be tamed. Look, we can't be puppets every time a tweet comes out. The tweet did just come out, by the way. They had a distractor in chief in Italy, for example, Silvio Berlusconi. For years, they couldn't figure out how to defeat him. You know what they ended up doing? And they figured out how to beat him. They ignored him, and they focused. We're going to talk about what we're going to do for America. Now, my challenge is to our Democratic Party. This is a bold new vision that these four women and many others are pushing. And they have made it clear we're not bringing up the left. We're coming from the bottom up. And this is something different. And there has not been a playbook. They are writing the book as we go. So please, sometimes, some things may make us feel a little bit uncomfortable. But we need to understand that this is a whole new political movement. And that's why it's so exciting for me to be able to support Rashida, AOC, Ilhan, and some of these folks, because they represent something that is just uniquely different that our country needs now more than ever if we're going to push back against these phobias.
Thank you all for so much food for thought, but also I think encouragement to really think about how we're showing up and how we're taking action in this space. And I really resonated with what Mr. Khan said about where the majority in this country stand. And I think it's really challenging to see that sometimes, but I realized I was so eager to start hearing from you all that I didn't properly situate myself. I lead an organization called Shoulder to Shoulder, which is a coalition of 34 different national religious denominations and organizations, primarily Christian and Jewish, that formed back in 2010 and continues to be very active today in specifically working to dismantle anti-Muslim discrimination in order to advance the American ideals that we all rely upon. And through that work, I've had the opportunity to go to a lot of different communities around the country and see how people of faith are responding and are showing up and are wanting to figure out the ways that they can be showing up with their Muslim siblings, but also doing their own self-reflection on why some of these tropes and myths and bigotries have taken root within their own communities. And so I, get inspired by going around the country and seeing what people of faith are doing. And I'm curious to hear from you all, and if anyone feels compelled to go first, we don't have to go down the line. But what do you think is helping in this space? What do you see as some of the promising possibilities to change the tide of this kind of onslaught of phobia and hate? And I think many of you hinted at this or started to speak to this in your response to the last question, but I'm curious to hear more explicitly what you think is helping. I'll call on someone if I need to.
Well, at the risk of repeating myself, what had been my personal observation that throughout the nation, I am so positively optimistic about this blessed nation, about its values, that nothing shakes my belief in the democratic values of this country. As I mentioned that rally in North Carolina, literally except some of my Republican brothers and sisters, rest of the country had rejected it, spoke against it, and firmly believes that that was not the reflection of our values, our democratic values. So wherever there had been Muslim leaders in the community, that community is heartened, strengthened, more politically involved, and is being recognized, Honorable Congresswoman is one of the symbol of that recognition. She has an amazing role to play. Hardly anybody knew Congresswoman Ilhan Omar prior to her election throughout the country, throughout the world. It is her courage, her work, her determination that has made her symbol of American democracy, multiracial democracy. Watch history. Her name and other colleagues, their names will be written golden letters on the pages of history because of their courage, because of what they stand for. There is a attack on American democratic values, not only American democratic values, but throughout the world on the democratic values, especially multiracial democratic values. And that slowly it is being rejected. Look at the election in Greece and other parts of the Europe. The pendulum has not swung full in the center, towards the center. But it is up to us. The world is looking, watching America, watching us. How do we represent multiracial democracy? Henceforth, always consider in the deepest of your heart that every step you take, every thought that comes, every conversation that you have, every contribution that you make, every effort that you make is to defend multiracial democracy in the United States, thereby heartening the rest of the world that this is the right way to human dignity. And on the other hand, are corrupt authoritarians and dictators that have attacked our election in 2016 are ready to attack again, regardless of this administration's denial of that interference. Make sure that when you are conducting your conversations, you are very much aware of it. I recently learned that from Russia, St. Petersburg, an organization was created, West Virginia coal miners for Trump. St. Petersburg, Russia. It is that interference that is taking place. Watch out for that. Remain heartened. Your time, your Creator has placed you in a leadership role, has given you the candle of this multiracial democracy. Here sits on the stage with me. I'm so honored to be with these leaders and the leaders in the audience that have become the candle bearers. There is sacredness to your role. Never ever be disheartened by these attacks. Look, I apologize if I'm offending somebody. Hitler came to power through election. Remember that. As I mentioned, Japanese Americans, Catholic Americans, Irish Americans, Catholic Americans in this country were blamed as spies of Pope. Throw them out in the ocean. They don't deserve to be in America. It is that what took place after the Japanese American mistreatment. After the McCarthy era came the role of our civil rights leaders that uplifted this entire nation and the mankind to a higher dignity. Your role has already been decided. Your role had already been chosen for you. Adopt it. Be courageous to adopt it. Accept it. That I have been chosen. My time, my Creator has chosen me to lead. Look at the courage. Look at the courage of Ilhan. She has become the symbol of courage for this nation. A few months ago, hardly anybody knew except Minnesota who she was. It is that lies ahead for each and every one of us. You know, when I get very tired of traveling and speaking and being reminded of thousands of men and women that defended this country, I travel to Arlington Cemetery, Section 60. I go and stand there. That is America. They have died defending these values, multiracial democracy. Their tombstones speak to us. We died defending this multiracial democracy. How dare you don't stand for it? Your time has chosen. Sorry for the long answer, but your time has chosen each and every one of you. There is sacredness in your mission, in your carrying this candle, carrying this light. Very quietly bow your head, continue to walk forward, continue to vote, make sure you take people with you to contribute, take people with you to vote, to register, and you will see that slowly. It took 30 years for Irish Americans to elect the first president. from No Irish Need Apply signs throughout the United States. I'm sure you have seen the pictures of the Klan rallies on the streets of Washington not too long ago. But immediately after that came the role and the sacrifice and the service of our civil rights leaders that uplifted this entire nation. It is that role that you're about to play, that you're playing. Each and every one of you has that sacredness, uplifting the human dignity, defeating this hate and division, corrupt hate and division. There had been challenges in the past, remember those communities that have dealt with that hate and division and have been successful. Thank you.
Thank you, Ilhan, for centering us. It's really good to think of everything within the context of where we've been, where we could go. I just wanted to sort of uplift the stories of unity between faith groups and the interfaith work that is being done in Minnesota, that has allowed, I think, for us to have the kind of successes we've had in our state. Correct me if I'm wrong, Ken, but I remember early in 2018, the Republican Party decided in the caucuses that they were going to pass out flyers that said Muslims are infiltrating the Republican Party to gain something. I can't quite put my finger on it. I don't know what the gain might have been, but to just participate in democracy. And I remember there were multiple state representatives that had participated in this sort of like fear-mongering within the Muslim community, and organizations like Isaiah, that is an organization that leads interfaith work, brought together Muslims, people from the Muslim community, people from the Jewish community, people from different denominations of faiths, and decided that we were collectively going to form a coalition to try to make sure that people didn't have the fear of participating in our democracy. And so I remember there being a true infiltration, because people flooded the caucuses and realized that when people tell you you don't belong, you make sure your presence is seen and heard. And so in that process, I think it was probably the first time faith groups in Minnesota decided to make their presence known in a way that it hasn't before. And I think it is because of them that we have a democratic governor. I think it is because of them that my predecessor, Keith Allison, is now the Attorney General. I think it is because of that coalition that we no longer have those Republican representatives that participated in that fear-mongering. And I think it is because of them that someone like me could get elected in our state with all of the orchestrated smears against me and Keith. It is to say that when we bond together, when we understand that our opportunities to build community rise from the most painful places, that we are able to, I think, have the kind of celebrations that we have in Minnesota. And I want to make sure that people in every single state that feel the intensity of the divisions, that they could too overcome, and that they too can do the work of building community and figuring out what are the values that unite them, and decide that it is important that we all participate in our democracy. It is bettered with our participation, and that we have a responsibility to not only go and put our voice in that ballot box, but we have a responsibility to bring along every single community member so that they are able to do that as well. And for Muslims in this room, for so long, I think we've made ourselves believe that this process is for someone else, that we might not be able to create the kind of impact that we want, that if the kind of vitriol that's met with people like myself or Rashida and Keith exists still in American society, why bother? But I believe it is because of that you should bother. As Sam said, every single time we have infused the kind of multicultural democracy that we want into this system, it's always been met with challenges. And because people have forced themselves to face those challenges head on, that we are still able to represent our communities across this country. And so I say to you, don't allow this to make you diminish your voice. Make sure that you use this energy to make yourself more visible, to speak louder, to have more courage, to be more bold. Because with this particular challenge, we have an opportunity to rise more than we have risen before.
So you asked, what is helping? And I want to highlight the courage that it takes to stand in against all of what is coming at the folks who are leading this charge. So to the Congresswoman and her partners, thank you for taking that on. But that courage matters a lot, and it's not just the courage of leaders. For a long time, Ilhan talked about the fact that we did not believe that this process was for us. It was almost like, you remember being a little kid, and you know that adults are having a conversation that matters, and probably matters specifically to you, but they lock you out of it. And I think in that moment, there are two responses. You just say, well, I guess I just shouldn't be a part of this. Or you sit there at the door and try and listen and figure out what's going on. And maybe you even just barge into that door. For a long time, these conversations that were so fundamental to our ability to exist and to be and to do and to aspire and to hope in the society were being done without us, at our exclusion. And the worst thing about it is that a lot of that exclusion happens at the hands of people who say that they care about you. And so it takes courage to stand up and say, you're not going to decide my future without me present. In fact, I will be the one who decides my future, not you. And so it takes courage in the face of people who say, well, haven't we done this for you all along? Don't you trust us? We have the answers. To stand up and say, no, you don't. Because at the end of the day, as I think about raising my baby girl, it will never be the democracy I want for her until there are people who look like her actively making decisions about her and for her and with her. And it's also the courage of people to stand up and be willing to follow. I remember when I decided that I was going to run, the loudest and most consistent opposition I got was from the Muslim community. But this is a redemption story now. But what happened is that over time, as we started to build momentum, I remember specifically one of the uncles in the community who just could not believe that somebody who looked like me with a name that's 11 letters long, so long I had to truncate it in the middle, could run for office in a state like Michigan. He comes up to me in the middle of one of our rallies and he says, hey, these white people really like you. And he showed up at every single rally thereafter. It's, on the one hand, frustrating to know that we need the validation of others to believe in our own people. But at the same time, I have to credit him, because in the end, when he came along, he came along. And so we have to be willing to appreciate that this is a government of people. God doesn't run this government. People run this government. And people all kind of look like us. And the sad thing about being yourself is that you know better, intimately, all of your failings and all of your frustrations and all the things about you that aren't quite right. Right? All of the bumps and warts that you don't just show to the world all the time. So you're sitting there being like, well, I'm deeply imperfect, and those people are clearly perfect, so there's that. They're not perfect. We're not perfect. We're going to get it wrong. We're going to make mistakes. But we've got to decide and have the courage to realize that even if it means making mistakes in the public eye, those mistakes matter because it really actually matters. That people from our community see us doing the hard work of governing, being a part of the solution set that will dictate their futures. So to me, it's the courage of leaders to lead and people who follow to follow. And I see that happening in little communities on big platforms all the time. And that, to me, that means that that world that we're going to hand off to my little girl, it's going to be one where she feels like she belongs in ways that I know I felt like I didn't. And even before me, people felt even worse. So that's happening. And that's life.
So we have just about 5 minutes. I know there's much more to say, but I know there's also folks in the crowd who would like to ask some questions. We have a very brief amount of time, so I ask you to please keep it to a question and keep it concise. I'm going to take 3 and then pitch it back to folks to answer as you wish, again, briefly, so that we can keep folks on time today. So I saw your hand, and I'm sorry, I'm going to get somebody a little towards the back. Or perhaps not. Go ahead. Yeah.
Is there a microphone there?
Yes. Thank you.
Thanks. My name is Ani Zonabelt. I'm the president of Muslims for Progressive Values. The question is to Congresswoman Ilhan. There's 2 issues here. One is the issue of stoning when the Sultan of Brunei was fantasizing about stoning in the name of Islam. We have written an op-ed against this as how antithesis to Islam it is as a Muslim organization. You have a legislation that you have drafted sanctioning or punishing anyone in America who actually does business with a country that implements stoning. I wanted to know what the status of that legislation is. And the other issue is female genital mutilation and cutting. The Detroit case that actually, where the federal government lost the case because the law was 20 years old, and et cetera, et cetera. I'd like to know, will you be able to make a statement against FGM? Because that's an issue in Detroit. It would be really powerful if the 2 Muslim congresswomen, yourself and Rashida, would make a statement on this issue. Thanks.
Thanks for the question. We'll collect 2 more and pitch it back to you all. Yes, please.
Hi, my name is Luke Lorenz. I represent Veterans Against Hate. Let me first say, Mr. Khan, your son is an American hero, and anyone who feels otherwise has obviously never served. Since we're lucky enough to have Congresswoman Omar here, I just want to bring up one issue. Ma'am, we have veterans that are being deported very, very sadly. Would you support legislation that would require the military to ensure that all non-citizens that enlist are guided through the citizenship process so that by the time they leave the military, they are full-fledged 100% American citizens?
All right, the woman in yellow. Thank you.
Hello, my name is Amina, and as I was listening to you all, I just have a question for all of you. Well, we were talking about phobias, but how are we going to fight against the phobia that our own Muslim sisters and brothers have against Central American migrants at the border and undocumented immigrants? And how are we going to fight against the internalized racism that you were talking about that Muslims have against themselves and other groups such as Black Lives Matters and the LGBTQI community. Just this past, I know you had walked in a pride parade, Sister Ilhan Umar did, and in our own small community, the Muslims were really upset about it, and there was a few of us that had to fight against it, but these are things that we fight against in our own Muslim community, and I just want all of you to kind of just touch base on how do we do that.
Great question.
Thank you. So this is lightning round, and I know these weren't questions that can be necessarily answered simply, but please go ahead and speak to what you're able, and then I hope that there's opportunity throughout the caucus for conversation, deepening some of these conversations as well.
Thank you. Those were excellent questions. We've proposed few legislation around veterans who've served our country and people who are still active. There has been many cases where people have been deported, and there are, I think, 500 right now in the process of being deported. And so completely support making sure that people who've made that kind of sacrifice for our country are able to stay in our country. And so we're working on that with some of our colleagues who are sponsoring a few bills around that. In regards to the Brunei bill, you can help advocate for it. It doesn't have a lot of support in Congress because there is lots of objection coming from many of the countries that do what the Brunei bill opposes. And many of those countries have lots of friends in Congress. And so it would really be nice if many of you advocated for it and made sure that that bill is a priority. I think when we are talking about defending human rights, we have to do that regardless of where it is. And I feel strongly about what the bill speaks to and its purpose. So I hope you join me in doing that. Your second question is an appalling question because I always feel like there are bills that we vote on, bills we sponsor, many statements we put out, and then we're in a panel like this, and the question is posed, could you and Rashida do this? And it's like, how often should I make a schedule? Like, does this need to be on repeat every 5 minutes? Should I be like, so today I forgot to condemn Al-Qaeda, so here's the Al-Qaeda one. Today I forgot to condemn FGM, so here it goes. Today I forgot to condemn Hamas, so here it goes. Today I it is a very frustrating question. It comes up. You can look at my record. I voted 4 bills doing exactly what you're asking me to do. I have put out statements upon statements. There's a bill in Congress. There's a resolution that I am the co-author of that I voted out of the Foreign Affairs Committee. And so I am, I think, quite disgusted, really, to be honest, that as Muslim legislators, we are constantly being asked to waste our time speaking to issues that other people are not asked to speak to because the assumption exists is that we somehow support and are for, right? No, there is an assumption. So I want to make sure that the next time someone is in an audience and is looking at me and Rashida and Abdul and Sam, that they ask us the proper questions that they will probably ask any member of Congress, or any legislator, or any politician. And would not come with an accusation that we might support so evil, so vile. What we look for, and what this whole conversation is about, is that not only do we not have internalized fears about what we might believe and how that gets implemented, but that we also don't have, right, assumptions about what our value basis might be because of where we might come from and who we pray to. And so I would like, not just for you, but for everyone, to know that if you want us to speak as politicians, American politicians, then you treat us as such.
Man, she makes me want to tear up and just ready to go. Look, after I got elected, I'd have these events, and we call them, we call them uncles. So the uncle comes up to me. I'm inner Dean Abdallah right now. The uncle comes up to me, Sam, we support you 100%. 100%. But what about the gays? And I'm like, let me explain something to you. I'm here because I swore in, my unofficial and my official, I swore in on the Constitution. When I defend my LGBT members, when I defend people from all walks of life, I'm actually defending Muslims. I'm actually defending women. I'm actually defending African Americans. And so, coming back to those common values, Ken, that you talked about, look, let's not get distracted. Let's make sure that we are bold. And every single time I've ever heard Ilhan speak, and Abdul, whatever it is, they are on the right side of history. And this is the one, in my closing remark, when I'm not sure what to do, I just remember that test. Do not be on the wrong side of history. And it's great to be on this panel with people who are on the right side of history today.
First, I know this is the last round for me. I wish to express my gratitude, very sincere gratitude to Ghazala, Zarina, members of the board, and volunteers for organizing this very timely event. May God bless you and may you be rewarded. We are grateful, sincerely grateful to you all. Thank you. Second, this is my personal belief and practice that when I read my holy scripture, my Quran, time after time after time, I find God addressing itself, Rabbul Alameen, meaning I have created every being on this planet. Who are we to disrespect and downgrade anyone? Second, so I hold every human being created in equal dignity. Second, and very important in Islamic faith, in my faith, is the designation of the Prophet, peace be upon him, was Rahmatul lil Alameen. No one was excluded. Everyone is included. Rahmatul lil Alameen, mercy for the universe. I just want Muslims to ponder on this. Rabbul Alameen and Rahmatul lil Alameen. Everyone is included and everyone has equal dignity. That is why the time has come to Muslims with that basic foundation to lead the charge, support our constitution, our democracy, our basic human dignities. It is so important that we practice our faith with that spirit. Thank you.
I want to just tell you a story from the lores of American political history, and I hope it's relevant. Everybody knows who President Lyndon B. Johnson is. Now, LBJ had no political skills except for the skill of politicking. He understood how people thought and how he could persuade them. Sometimes good, sometimes bad, sometimes ugly, but he knew how to persuade people. And when he was first running for Congress, he'd never been elected to anything in his life, and he was running in a Texas district. And one of his main opponents was a farmer who happened to farm pigs. And LBJ told his staff, they said, look, the next time you see the press corps, I want you to tell the press corps that this farmer, that he's having relations with his pigs. And his people look at him and they said, that's not true. We know that that's not true. That's ridiculous. They're going to see right through it. He said, I know. I just want to hear him deny it. And so every time that farmer would meet with the press, you know what he would start with? I just want to make it clear, I am not having relations with my pigs. George Lakoff takes this idea and he writes a book about it called Don't Think of an Elephant. When I tell you don't think of an elephant, what do you think of? An elephant. And so when we as Muslim political people, when we get in this position where we reflexively start to deny all of the allegations that they make about us, all we are doing is centering the elephant. Yes, I am a Muslim candidate. Yes, I will speak to all of the stereotypes you have about me. Yes, even in the setting where I deny it, it's still the only thing I talk about. So remember when we started, we talked, we all agreed that the work of racism or phobia is distraction. The biggest danger, in fact, is that you start falling into the frame of the distraction itself. So you don't even have to be distracted anymore. All you're doing is just speaking to the system of distraction. And I think the point that you made, Congresswoman, is entirely correct. The reason all of us ran isn't because we wanted to make sure that everybody knew that Muslims are against all of the things that all of us are against anyway. We ran because there are people in our communities who don't have health care. We ran because it's too hard to get a good job that's got benefits. We ran because inequality is through the roof and is being driven by a system of corporate greed that we can do something about. Those are Muslim problems, but they are problems with which Islam has a very particular perspective and something to add. And on this note about our engagement with a broader, more inclusive America, to me, there is no question that whether or not we stand up with our allies who identify a certain way, who love who they choose to love, this is a question about whether or not we are willing to build the kind of America where people who look different, who pray different, who love different can be included. As Sam said so eloquently, it is about advocating for ourselves because we are advocating for that Constitution. This is the same set of questions. And I'll be clear, we as a community have to decide whether or not we are willing to sustain all of these huge double standards about the issues of the day versus issues that a long time ago, right, we haven't necessarily been talking about. For example, when I ran, I supported legalizing marijuana on a number of technical fronts. And every time I'd get the same version of the uncle speech, but the marijuana is a drug. And I'd say, yeah, I know. But actually, I don't see you standing up for alcohol prohibition. So why the double standard? And so we've got to decide that we are going to serve and lead this country on its moral grounds, right? And recognize that beyond that, our responsibility is to infuse it with something bigger. And that something bigger is that if you step back to the founding of our faith, you read the seerah of the Prophet, you look at the way he led his life, you realize that the message was his character. It was the way he engaged people, the empathy that he had for everybody, the fact that he could look somebody who was an avowed enemy of his, who tried to kill him and his family, and see the good in that person. If there's something that we bring with us into this political frame, it ought to be that character. Because if the Prophet was asked about what he was sent to do, he said, verily, I was only sent to insist upon the best of good character. So we have to ask ourselves, what is it that we are leading on? What is the spirit of the message that we are bringing with us in these conversations about how we want to perfect
Because frankly, if all of us brought that character where we saw the best in everybody, we were kind no matter what the disagreement might be, where we always believed in somebody's redemptive capacity for tomorrow,